Air density and pressure. What is air? The objective of this video will be that scientists will learn about the atmosphere by taking notes on air, density, and air pressure. So to start, let's talk about the atmosphere. The atmosphere is the layer of gases that surround Earth. When you look up, you're looking at the atmosphere. Most of the gases are in the bottom layer. So if we're looking at the diagram on the right, you notice here's the Earth. And this layer right next to the Earth, the troposphere, this is where most of the atmosphere atoms are. This bottom layer is also where weather happens. There's several other layers above that, but weather that we experience is in this bottom layer. Now, speaking of air, what is it? Well, air is a thing, so it's matter, which means that it's made up of molecules. And because it's made up of molecules, it follows rules. So just like liquids and solids and gases, they're all matter, they all follow rules. Air is also matter, which means that it will also have density and it will create pressure. And we're going to talk about those two parts, density and pressure. To start, what is density? Well, density is a measure of how many atoms are packed into a space. So imagine we have two objects. If these green balls represent the atoms, you can see that the object on the left has way fewer atoms than the object on the right. We would say that the object on the right is more dense because it has more atoms, whereas the object on the left would be less dense because it has less atoms. Now, an interesting thing about density is that you can change it. You can change the density of an object by changing the heat. In fact, heat changes density of things. As things heat up, their atoms start to gain energy and spread apart. Now, this should remind you of the water cycle. As these atoms start to heat up and move apart, well, then there's fewer of them in the space, and the object becomes less dense. When things cool down, their atoms slow down, and the atoms start to come together. Think about a bunch of cold people on a windy day. They're all going to get close together. That's sort of like what the atoms do. As they start to come together, the object becomes more dense. So again, as you add heat, an object becomes less dense. And as things become cold, they become more dense. Density also tells us if something is going to float or sink. So let's pretend this green square represents the water in the glass. Take a look at how many atoms are in the water. Look at how dense the water is. Now, if I drop something in that is less dense, that object will float on top of the water because it is less dense. If I drop something in that is more dense, it'll sink through the water because the object is more dense. Again, density tells us if something will float or sink. Less dense things will float, and more dense things will sink. Finally, we have to talk about pressure because air can create pressure. And pressure is simply the force pushing on a surface. If you push on a table or if you push on your arm, you're creating pressure. Now, the denser an object is, the more pressure it creates. Imagine a balloon and a bowling ball. Both are about the same size. The bowling ball is much more dense. If I put a bowling ball on your hand, it would feel like it has a lot more pressure than if I put a balloon on your hand. So more dense objects create more pressure, and less dense objects create less pressure. Now, because air is made out of atoms, it also creates pressure. And this is weird to think about, but when you go outside, there's a mile of air above your head, and that air is pushing down on you. That's what we call air pressure. And again, As things become cold, they become more dense. So cold air creates more pressure. And as things heat up, they become less dense. So hot air creates less pressure. The key points I want you to walk away with are that weather occurs in the atmosphere, and that's what this unit is about. It's all about weather. The atmosphere is made of air. Air is made of molecules and atoms. And because air is matter, because it's made of atoms and molecules, it has density and creates pressure.